Welcome everyone to ResV. Coach Reslow here. I have another great coach to talk to today. I'm really excited about it. This is Craig Martin from Stonehill, the Skyhawks, right? Did I get that right? The Skyhawks? I
Yes,
know
you did.
I tried to say it a bunch of times incorrectly when I was doing the broadcast for Brown. I was like, oh man, I just said that wrong.
What'd you call
Uh
us?
I think I said Sky Chiefs once, and because one of the things, this broadcast thing, I love doing it, Craig. I really do. But Evan Gilio makes fun of me all the time. He says, Rez will say some things, some pronunciations, just unbelievably Swedish and weird, and it's amazing they let him on the air. So,
Uh-huh. Well, you weren't too
so
far off. I know Stonehill used to be called the Chieftains long before I got here.
oh,
So,
dude, so I was right there.
yeah, I mean, you were just having a flashback to your childhood days when I'm sure you were rooting for all things Stonehill.
I was the ultimate Stonehill fan when I was 4, and
Great.
and now I'm back. I'm circling around. Hey, welcome, man. How are you doing, Coach? It's been a wonderful ride for you in terms of your volleyball career. So I do want to touch on all that, but I want to start at the beginning because how'd you get into the game? Number one, and then number two, when did you realize it was fun to beat my ass in the middle playing volleyball?
I have a great story about that. That was my favorite time playing against you. Um, but no, I think, yeah, first, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk to you. But yeah, when I got into volleyball, I was probably about 11 years old. A little bit of a long story here, so I apologize for that. But so my mother
Good.
was in a snowmobile accident when I was about 8, right? So she ended up in a wheelchair, had a head injury. And my father was always a very athletic individual. He always, played hockey growing up. I remember when I was a kid, he would play in softball leagues, things like that. And when my mother had her accident, he had just started a business, an auto body business, a year or so before that, maybe 2 years before that. So, yeah, as you know, anytime you start a brand new business, you don't make very much money right off the bat. It's trying to break even as best you can. And with a family of 3 children and now a wife who is going through this humongous medical uh, stuck as far as the finances. She was in a hospital for 2 years and going through rehab and needing to
Yeah.
make renovations to the house. So he unfortunately sort of got away from having any type of extracurricular activities. When I was about 11, he was, obviously worked all the time. Always made it a point to make sure that we could get to our baseball practices, basketball, whatever we needed to get to. My grandmother
Mm.
was a huge help in bringing us to places when we needed to get to before my mother had the ability to drive. Um, but some people showed up at his, needing their car fixed, and they just happened to play volleyball. They played a lot of outdoor grass doubles volleyball, and just talking while they were in my dad's office and picking up their car. And they were like, yeah, if you want to learn, like we play at Rollins Park in Concord, New Hampshire for, like once a week or whatever, twice a week, maybe during the summers. And they're like, come on out. And so he did. Like he's just like he needed an opportunity to just sort of go and be active again. Like at the time he was only what, 30, 35, 36
Mm.
maybe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he started going, and obviously you got 3 little kids who all were into sports of a different nature. And so he was sort of just, hey, I'm going to the park, I'm going to play volleyball, you guys sort of just hang out, you go, there's a basketball court nearby, a tennis court, like whatever, just go. But sure enough, there's a ball involved. And so we started learning how to pepper and started learning how to, eventually they would be like, all right, at the end of the night, they would let the kids on the court and they'd play fours, and we just
Oh,
sort of
cool.
play around. And then, by the time I was 13, 14, I was playing doubles regularly on the grass. And I was 16 when I first started playing indoor volleyball. And that was just a open gym pickup type of situation that my dad would take us to. And all the other older generation people that were there to play were mad that these 16-year-old kids were coming in and,
Yeah.
being athletic, jumping well and hitting volleyballs at them. But
Hard.
it's fun. Yeah, well, they were like, this is supposed to be an adult open league or adult open night, and then my dad was like, he's 16, like whatever, like
Yeah, come on.
so. So yeah, but then as soon as I turned 18, again, we didn't have high school volleyball where I was. There was no boys volleyball anywhere in the state of New Hampshire at the time, so I didn't have a team to play on. I remember being 15, and my dad said that there was like a club team around Boston that he was willing to drive us to. And for us, it was an hour and a half ride to get to Boston, and knowing my mom can't drive, my dad would have to bring us. He's working. We were just sort of like, I don't know about doing that twice a week.
Mm.
So we ended up, in hindsight, I certainly wish I would have taken him up on that opportunity, because he saw how much we enjoyed the game, and me and my brothers, and sort of wanted to help foster our growth, and
Yeah.
see if it was something that we really really enjoyed. But ultimately, I obviously fell in love with the game. I started playing indoor leagues when I was 18, and able to play in those. And then when I got into college, John O'Brien, who you probably know,
Oh yeah.
referee. So
Big John.
he was the coach at New Hampshire College at the time where I went to school, which is now Southern New Hampshire University.
Hmm.
So he was trying to get started a men's club program when I first got there, and essentially because he wanted to play, because it was pretty lax in the rules at that time. It's pretty much the rules were you have to be a member of the college, like he didn't necessarily specify
Yeah.
a student.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so he wanted to play, and then I showed up on campus and was very interested, and I knew one of the players on the women's team who went to my high school, so she
Mm.
sort of got me introduced in. So we sort of helped connect and get the whole program up and running. He ended up leaving the college after that year, and so I had asked his assistant coach to help me with the men's club team as far as coaching goes. Um, but then as soon as John left, she got the head coaching job for the women's varsity team.
Mm.
And then she asked me to be her assistant for the varsity team when I
Oh
was an
yeah.
undergrad. So that's sort of where my coaching career got started.
So, yeah.
So I
Cool.
was playing and coaching the men's club team. I got to coach the women's varsity team for, I think it was 3 seasons with her, until or maybe two, until she graduated. And then when she graduated, I stopped, because she had played at Central Connecticut State as a
Oh, no
Division I
kidding.
player.
Yeah.
But then she transferred to New Hampshire College, because after playing it for 4 years, she didn't get her degree at Central Connecticut, because essentially she was an athlete. So she was like, she's completely switched majors and had to go to school for another 2 years. So
Yeah.
she
If
was
you
actually an
switch,
undergrad student while
yeah,
she was a coach. So
if you switch majors, that definitely derails your time period in terms of how you're
right.
going to get everything accomplished. But I cannot believe I did not know that John O'Brien was your original contact into the sport. John O'Brien is a referee, for those that don't know, and he's one of the funniest dudes I've ever met. Like I enjoy his company every time I see him, and he tells stories about his refereeing days and his playing days that are larger than life. Like
Yeah.
it's just absolutely larger than life. He and Rick Rowe can tell a story that will just leave you, either massively impressed or just jaw dropping. Like, I don't know what just happened. Like, this
Right.
story is just incredible.
I think the
Um,
funniest thing
uh,
with him, so obviously we were spending quite a bit of time together at the time as we got the men's club program going, and I was sort of helping out. I even like went with him a couple times on some recruiting trips. But
yeah,
he loved to play racquetball at the time, essentially anything active, like
yeah,
we were both into. So he was like, "Oh, like let's go play racquetball." And I'm like, "All right." And I didn't play a whole lot of racquetball at the time. It was sort of a new sport to me. But we're sort of playing. He's of course kicking the crap out of me. Um, but I'm also like a quick visual learner.
mm,
So I would see him do something, and then I'd be able to recognize when he was going to do it again. So, we're playing racquetball, and he gets sort of a shot that sort of hits the wall, and he's sort of charging forward for it. And, you know, for me, it was always about power. So I would like hit it as hard as I could if that happened to me, but he would go in and sort of chip it off the wall, and then I'd be at the
mm.
back wall and I would never get it. And so sort of, it happens once or twice. And then the very next time it's about to happen, like I recognize that he's going to do it. And so he comes and chips it off the wall, and I come screaming in and just full on swing. And he's against the wall, and he's just the screech that came out of his mouth as he anticipated what was about to happen. And then sure enough, the ball got him in the kidney, and just like
Dropped him.
the screech came out. He fell on the ground, and the next day he had like a black and blue welt, like the size of a softball.
Oh, that's awesome. That's now my
Yeah.
new favorite John O'Brien story. But the former favorite John O'Brien story is that I don't know if you remember the famous controversy with referees and mascots at Johnson and Wales.
No.
So there was a match that occurred, right? That I don't know who was playing. It was Jay Wu and somebody, and the mascot, the Willie the Wildcat, was wandering around, bouncing around, doing his thing, like you do. And the referees, I believe, were Rick Rowe and Pete Worm. So Worm's on the stand, and I guess during a timeout, Willie's dancing and comes over and high fives Worm. So Worm high fives it, bang, and whatever, life moves on. But apparently that video was sent to the officials, whoever runs everything, and they were like,
Right.
you can't high five the mascot. Like, it looks improper. And
Right.
so when they went to when all those guys went to the national meeting, that was brought up, like that video was shown, and Pete was pissed. Like, Pete was really upset because, Pete's a sweetheart, and to him, like, high-fiving the mascot isn't him showing favoritism to somebody. The dude just came up and he's got to leave him hanging like that. The whole thing is crazy. So anyway, I had no idea that this occurred, and I had just become the Johnson and Wales men's volleyball coach. And I'm talking with John, and John's telling the story, and I'm just aghast. I'm like, oh my God, like, that's unbelievable. Why is that a big deal? And like, so John pretends to be Pete and goes, what's he supposed to do? Like, as he comes up with the high five, just be like, no, get out of here. No, no, no. And it was the way John does it was I was in tears. Like, I was almost on the
Right.
floor
Right.
laughing so hard. How do you deny someone a high five? And
Well,
that
I feel
became
like
sort of,
no matter what, it's gonna show up on a video as either you shouldn't do this by high fiving, or what, look at this asshole ref who isn't willing to high five the mascot.
yeah, and shaking his head, go shaking him off, like, no, get out of
Right.
here. No, get out of here.
Right.
Oh my gosh. The whole scenario is so unbelievably stupid, but it was made into such a big deal that every time I saw John, I demanded, and this is how childish I am. Every time I saw John, I demanded he retell the story. Yeah, like, I need to see it again. I need
Yeah.
to see it again. But yeah, oh, wonderful guy. All of those guys I just talked about, Pete Werme, Rick Rowe, and John. I love those guys. They're wonderful guys, good referees. And I always look forward to seeing them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had no idea that you were involved with John. That's fantastic. And then, from there, you didn't get to tell your story yet about how you beat my ass. Like, well, all the time you beat my
Yeah, obviously you were a little bit newer to the game at the time, so you had finished playing basketball and started hanging out with Pete and Boo and Dan Green and who else? I forget his name now. Steve down at URI, who was the
Yeah,
URI coach
Bulla.
or
Yeah,
assistant.
we called him Bulla. And then
Um,
Sunshine was on that team, and there were some other dudes.
yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah,
I
you were
stunk.
sort of you were the lost guy in the middle, and I was not. So,
Yeah,
uh,
you were thumping me, dude.
my favorite, well, my most memorable moment of playing against you, I think we were in the finals of a Yankee tournament, like an AAA Yankee tournament down at URI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know Steve was running the tournament. I think he was playing libero. I think you had Boo on the outside. Dan Green was setting. Wehrman was playing on the right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember we had a setter who didn't normally play with us, Steve Ing. And he was a guy that sort of deep dishes just a little bit. So I was struggling all throughout pool play with connecting with him.
Mm.
And right before playoffs, he was like, "Hey, what do I need to do?" And I was like, "Well, to be honest, like, because you sort of slow the ball down, like, I'm actually hitching and then having to reload because I'm trying to come through and the ball's not there. So, and then I'm missing the
Yeah.
ball." And he's like, "All right, I'll try to get it out quicker." And I was like, "All right." And then sure enough, in the playoffs, timing was perfect, right? So anyway, yeah, playing against you, like I was telling him, like, we had a signal that was just this, which was essentially just run a push one.
Yep.
So I was just telling him to push it to my left shoulder, and I was just coming up and hitting the ball to the one on you, and like, I think I got like 3 in a row, 4 in a row, whatever it was. And then on the 5th one, I think you like really jumped hard, and I got it off the side of your hand and still got the kill. And so on the very next play, I was like, "Hey, he's biting. Let's go back to a 1 ball." And so Steve goes, "Okay." So very next play, perfect pass, come up. You really bit hard because
I
I hit
wasn't
like
gonna let it happen again.
I hit 7 balls in a row over there, but you really bit hard, and I planted the ball in front of Boo, who was playing left back, like bounced it on the 10-foot line or whatever, and he just sort of like, and you just looked at me and you're like, "God, you're making me look like an ass right now."
And now in retrospect, as I think back to it, none of that is my fault. We should have served tougher. because
Yeah,
you
yeah,
should not have
absolutely.
been able to
We
run.
we were definitely on a good run of passing well. We had a really good passing team between Tom Olson and Joe Federline, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
had some guys that were pretty good at defense and pretty good at passing. So we were in system a lot, which was good for me as a middle.
Yep, yep. I tell you, I mean, and you were small middle too. I mean, not
Yeah,
small. I mean, you're not a small person, but you're what, 6'2",
at
6'1"?
6'2", yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
very undersized middle in the men's game, that's for sure.
And I'm 6'6", and so like one of the things I did notice throughout my career is I always had trouble with the smaller middles. Like you and Dana, you guys used to eat
Hmm.
me up, and like I would play bigger dudes and I would fare a little bit better. Don't know why, don't know how, but man, but you were really good. I mean, Dana was really good too. Just undersized guys, and you guys blocked well too. I mean, yeah, I mean, you were way better than I was.
Blocking was not my game. It was one of those things I had to constantly think about,
Yeah,
but offense was more my speed.
you were pretty good at it, and yeah, that I remember that final, and I remember Boo getting mad at me, and one of the things, and Boo, I mean, I love Boo too, but Boo can get really boisterous and really start pushing you around because he's very, very good. He was
Right.
arguably the top player in the region for a long, long time, and he when he would lose his cool, you had to listen to him because he was that elite at the time.
Hmm.
But at that time period, he was on his downward slope. He wasn't nearly as good as he had used to be. And I was brand new and I was a basketball guy. And like one of the things that Boo realized is that if you pushed me, I would actually turn and say something pretty awful. And
Yeah.
so and so he kind of used to leave me alone. Like he would just be like, we'll just leave him alone. But he got back at me. He got me back later on. The last tournament I ever played in, I played in a tournament at Bryant, and we had Brad Borsay on our team. And Big Brad could do work. And we're playing teams that we shouldn't be beating, and we end up running a 4-2. So whoever was in the front row was setting in the center, in the middle, excuse me, and it's match point against one of the best teams there in the playoffs, and I'm hitting on the pin. Now that's a horrible idea. Like I am not a pin hitter at all. And so it's me on the left and Brad on the right for the match, right? Like we're going to lose if we don't side out here. And that poop Redded sets me, right? So now I'm coming in and the middle blockers got to be 6'8". The setter 6'5", and we should not be in this match. And you know how sometimes where tournaments go, like the semifinals or whatever, they're usually one game because you just run out of time. Like you don't really have, which allows the weaker team a real shot. Like, all right, one match, well, excuse me, one set to 25, anything can happen.
Yep.
And so he sets me, and like I somehow squibble it through the block and get the kill, and we survive, and we end up upsetting them, and we're all pretty happy. We shake hands, and I immediately grab Boo. Like I grab his shirt, and I said, "You're a jerk." Actually, I used harder words, but I'm not going to say it here. And he's like, "What, Res? What?" And I was like, "Dude, you set me in that moment because win or lose, if we win, it's great, but if we lose, then it's your fault." And I'm like, "Oh, I would never do that." I'm like, "Yeah, it's exactly what because you remember me yelling at you." Like it's freaking. But anyway, all right, enough about that stuff. Let's keep talking about you, man. So
All right.
when did you start coaching with Coach Kolick at Riviere?
Yeah, so coming out of college, I sort of got out of coaching a little bit, but I had a kid who ended up taking over the club program for me, named Eric Snyder, who is from Western Massachusetts, and he's gone on to coaching himself. But he sort of called me up a year or two later and was like, "Hey, like I got a friend who runs a camp, and she's looking for more coaches." Like, and so I started being an assistant coach at the camps and going through all that, and then eventually I don't know if you know who Holly Key is, but she's a good friend
Oh
of
yeah, I
mine
know
from New
Holly. Yeah.
Hampshire. So she was a JV coach at a high school up in New Hampshire, and I was DJing. I was a karaoke DJ up there for a long time. She was like, "Hey, like, you want to coach at the middle school? Because we want a little bit more of a feeder program. Like they have a math teacher who's essentially their volleyball coach, doesn't know anything about volleyball, and we want to put somebody in there that can teach them the basic skills, so when they come to the high school, that they're a little bit better prepared."
Hmm.
So I was like, all right. So I took that over for 2 seasons, and then sort of after that second season, I was playing in a league in New Hampshire with Craig Kolick, and his assistant coaches were moving to Florida. It was a married couple that they used to play with as far as indoor nationals and things like that. And he was like, "Hey, you want to get out of that stupid middle school and come coach with me?" And I was like, "Sure." And he was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You can coach with you do both the men and the women." He's like, "How much you get for the middle school?" And I was like, "I don't know, like $2,000 or something like that for the year." And he's like, "Yeah, we'll give you that for each season." And I was like, "All right, that sounds better."
That sounds a
So
little bit better.
yeah, so fall of 2005, I ended up helping out with the women's team, and then obviously with the men's team for 2006 in the spring there, and
Did
was
you
there for
realize
six
that if you
seasons.
had told him a different number, you probably would have matched it? Like,
I don't know that he would have, like, if you know Riviere at the time, like it was not common for any of the coaches to be full time.
hmm,
I think Craig was one of, because he was coaching two sports and he was an athletic director, he was one. And then I believe the men's basketball coach, who was also the cross country coach during the fall, was another. And I think that was it. So everybody was part time. Assistant coaches were making $1,500 to $2,500 a season. So yeah, I don't know that it would have been much different. I think I got a raise to like $2,500 in like year 3 or something like that.
should have been
Uh,
like, dude, they're paying me 6 grand.
right. Yeah.
What do you think?
Uh,
6 grand
but yeah,
per
still
season.
obviously still DJing during that entire time, and well, for the
Sure.
first 3 years, and then in year 4, they brought on a full time sports information director position, which they offered to me so that I could be full time at the college while also helping out with coaching the volleyball team, which was a challenge in itself because I do not love writing or anything sports information related. Is like I'm not a stats guy. Like I don't love that stuff. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was something I was willing to do to be full time, but at the same time, there were times where it took me away from being able to coach volleyball because I had to go, stat a soccer game or whatever, So it was fun, but it was at the same time when the Mount Ida position became available, and they were willing to make that full time, which had been a part time position beforehand. So when that position, I had interviewed, I think, for Emerson, and didn't get that, and then interviewed for Mount Ida when they essentially I talked to the SID there just from my connections and was like, hey,
Yeah.
any chance they're going to make this full time? Because I know it was a part time position before, and they ended up, hey, we can get this guy if we make it full time. And so I was the men's volleyball coach and the intramural director right off the bat at Mount Ida, 2011, 12. So
Yeah.
yeah, 6 years with Kolick and then 7 years at Mount Ida.
Now, in those 6 years with Kolick, were you on that team? Were you a part of that team that went to the Molten Final Four with you part of that crew?
Yeah, 2006. My name's on the wall in the Hall of Fame at
All
Riviere
right.
for that one thing.
Oh, that's a big thing. I mean, I just wrote a story. I don't know if you caught it about Kevin Harrington as
I
he's
did.
stepping
Yeah,
away
I read that. Yeah.
it brought back some pretty cool memories of my early days at Johnson and Wales certainly, and it opened some eyes for me of things that I didn't realize. Like if you look at the Molten Final Four, Riviere, that team is the only team from the Northeast to ever participate in it. Like every other team was further south or across the country,
Right.
and how important that team was in a lot of ways for men's volleyball. So it's hard. It's hard to put all the pieces to the puzzle because like I know Craig Kolick was there. I didn't know if you were there. I wasn't sure where it all fits, and like I probably can name about 5 guys on that team, but of course Kevin was my link to it, and
Right.
so it's trying to get all the pieces together to
Yeah,
write a decent
2006.
article.
That was my first season with that team.
Mm,
The biggest, or not biggest memory, but one of the first things that happened when being a part of it, like Cole sort of brought me in, introduced me to the team at the beginning of the year, and then essentially was like, "Hey, we have nine, I think it was 9 or 12 seniors on the team. I can't remember. There's so many." Um, but he was like, "Don't worry about coaching them. Like, I'll take care of them." He's like, "All
mm,
you need to do is focus on." We only had 2 freshmen that year because we had such a big senior class, and it was Scott Wright was one of the freshmen,
Got it right.
and then another middle hitter, undersized middle hitter, very similar to me as far as stature and sort of quickness, but named Andy Michaels. And
Hmm.
so Andy was definitely like the one with a bright future. Like Scott was the project, you know. So, but essentially, Kolek's like, your job is to teach Scott Wright how to like proper footwork and how to hit a volleyball, like because he had such a nine jointed arm when he swung. It was just weird, and he was goofy footed. So pretty
Yeah,
much my
he was
entire
a
year
strange
was working
animal.
with him.
Scotty Wright
But
was a strange animal.
yeah, but it
Uh,
was fun. Like, unfortunately, like I think it was it that year? I think it was no, I guess it was the next year, but no, I guess it was that year. We had you probably know Scott is it Stedman,
yep, Zach Stedman. Yep.
Zach Stedman. There you go. Sorry, but he had injured his ankle um, real early in the season, and so he was supposed to be like sort of the 0-1, if you will,
Hmm.
and we ended up still a ton of seniors. So Stedman was a junior that year. But between the rest of the guys, like, we had Greg Stanton, Mike Buccarelli, Javier Laureano, Andy Chase was one of the
Well,
middles.
Andy Chase was the guy that made it go. I heard,
Right.
and again,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't actually, I never saw the team play. All the information I got was through Kevin.
Yep.
But one of the things that I heard that I thought was fascinating was that Chase was legit,
Yep.
probably at any level. Like he probably could have played at any level. And he wasn't in high school. He came out of East Providence, and he was sort of a bum, and not a bum, sort of a strong word, but just not really polished and ready to
Right.
rock. And certainly he comes in and he becomes the guy. And I heard that, and maybe you could, this is great, I have you in front of me, you can verify this stuff. So I heard that at some point, especially late in the season, like you guys just kept him in serve receive, like, and that's unusual for a middle to be in serve receive in the back row. I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, it was definitely, there were definitely times where, I don't want to say we obviously had a ton of defensive specialists, and at the time it was a single libero. It was a two libero system of any kind. I don't even know if you can do that now in men's game either, but the men's rules are different than the women's. So, but yeah, there were definitely times where it was we needed his ability to attack out of the back row, and so we would leave him in serve receive and just be like, all right, libero, you go in for whoever else isn't getting the job done. Or
like,
we just pull the libero off the court and just be like, all right, like here you go,
like
like
Andy's got it.
set Chase coming down the pipe, and we'll go from there.
Uh,
But more it was just, you had an all-American middle hitter who is now into the back row and could get the job done, and it freed up the rest of the front row offense as well. So there were times when we used it, and there were times when he was there for a decoy, but he was a pretty good passer, so we were able to just
so
leave him
cool.
in there and just stick his arms out.
So cool. Before we go down the Mount Ida road,
Yeah.
which certainly has some bumps and some interesting stories, but let's talk about your love of music, man. Like that's one of the things that I thought was really cool. Like you and I, and this will be a memory that maybe you remember, but maybe I remember it better. We're we're recruiting, and we end up going to a restaurant, and we're sitting just eating food, and the song comes on the radio or on the ambiance of the restaurant, and you're like, man, I like this song. And I had never heard it before, so I stopped and kind of took a step back and like, oh, okay. And then who's this? And you just started rattling off facts, like, oh, this is this band, this thing. And I was like, oh, okay. And of course, like as soon as I got on the plane, or we're not as soon as I left, I started looking up this band, and now it's one of the bands that I listen to. So, but I know you play. I know you talked about DJing a little bit too. So like, talk about your love of music a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that obviously if it's a band I like, I probably can spout off some information about them, but I'm certainly not a connoisseur of all things music. But yeah, I sort of in college I had a friend who really enjoyed singing.
Hmm.
So there happened to be a large pool hall slash bands, like they had a stage, they had bands play, um, that they would do a weekly karaoke contest,
Hmm.
and essentially part of it was, so they had a weekly contest that was leading up to like a big contest. So you had to go qualify at one of the weekly contests. for the big contest, which you could win money at. And essentially, you know, we're sitting around in college, and he was just like, "Hey, like, anybody want to go? I want to go qualify for this contest." And I didn't know he sung, so I was just like, "Yeah, sure, I'll go." And so I just went just to support him. And then throughout the process was just sort of looking through the karaoke catalog, and I was like, "Yeah, you know what? Like,
You only live once.
yeah, like, I mean, I didn't know anything. I was just like, yeah, I'll go. Like, I like this song. I'll go sing it." And I specifically remember it was a Hootie and the Blowfish song. I got a hand for you.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I get up there to sing it, and boy, was it bad. Like, it was real bad, real out of key. Like, obviously being up there unconfidently, like not actually pushing my voice out.
Right.
Uh, but what I didn't know at the time was really their whole thing was get as many people as they can to this finals night to drive up the liquor sales, right? So I was only
Sure.
19 at the time, so I wasn't helping out at all. But it was like, hey, so they qualified me for the finals contest, and sort of between that time and the finals, I think we had maybe 3 weeks. And
Get
my
your
my
act
buddy that
together.
well, my buddy that liked to sing, his dad had a karaoke, a real legit karaoke system at his house. So we went over to his
Yeah.
house and with a bunch of friends and just started singing off songs, and I was able to sort of figure out what my vocal range was a little bit.
Right.
So I ended up, I think I didn't in that contest. I don't think I placed, but I think the very next time we did it, like, I finished second
Mm.
in the contest. And then also the same place would run a weekly $25 cash contest. Like, so the Tuesday nights was the qualify for this big contest, and Thursday nights was a $25 cash contest. And I kept going back and winning and winning and winning and winning. And eventually the guy was like, "You know what? I'm tired of paying you for nothing. So want a job?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So yeah, I
That's
started doing
awesome.
some karaoke nights, got my own karaoke gig as far as being at a bar restaurant on a weekly basis, and then started picking up weddings and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, then eventually through karaoke, I was again singing with Holly Key when we were down in Atlanta at Nationals one year. There was a diner that happened to run karaoke for some reason. It was like a 24-hour diner in the middle of Atlanta that had karaoke on like
Like
three
you
nights a
do.
week. So
Like you do. Because no
yeah,
one, there's nothing better to do at 3 a.m. and sing karaoke.
yeah, but it was like it was the only place open past 10 o'clock in the middle of Atlanta, so like
Right.
close to the convention center. So essentially, all the New England volleyball players went to this place every night because there was nothing else to do without taking a taxi at the time, before Uber was invented. So taking a taxi out to the outskirts of the city. But yeah, I happened to be singing there, and then Jackie Rife, contacted me and was like, "Hey, like, any interest in doing something with a band?" And I was like, "Man, that sounds like it'd be fun." So him and I got together, started playing out, formed a band, and COVID sort of shut us down, and life, with my 5-year-old, and our drummer has a couple little kids, and our bass player has a couple kids. And
Mhm.
so, we sort of haven't been doing much lately, but when COVID hit, I picked up started learning how to play the guitar myself. So I haven't done any shows or anything like that, but yeah, still try to fiddle around a little bit. I keep the guitar here in my office. You can probably see it right behind me over there.
That's what, yeah. Well, I
Uh,
mean, speaking of Jackie, like, Jackie still reaches out to me on my birthday.
yeah, he's a
Jackie,
great guy.
Jackie was your assistant coach at Mount Ida, so this
Yeah.
actually segues pretty well. But Jackie's a wonderful dude. I didn't know that he was. I didn't know he was the guy that pulled you in to get for the band stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, essentially
I
he was like, I can't sing. He's like, but I'm into this other band with another, but he's like, but I want to do something else.
yeah.
So we just started like a little duet type of thing. Like, he played guitar, I sung. I started writing a few songs. I think we have like 6 or 7 original songs that we started playing.
Mhm.
And then eventually we were like, yeah, you know what? Like, maybe we should up this. And we sort of found a drummer, found a bass player, and started doing full electric shows.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah. But he was the first dude when I put up the promo for this interview. He's like, yes.
He is definitely the most supportive person I've ever met. Like,
Yeah,
he's
he's a good
whatever
dude.
you are interested in, like, he is interested in supporting you doing it. So
So let's quickly go over the Mount Ida years. And really, all I want to touch on is my favorite story. But you should talk about the Mount Ida years before we go into your women's volleyball career. And again, you've done it at all the levels. Like, you've been Division 3, Division 2, Division 1, and definitely want to get into those Division 2 recent year where you made the tournament, and now this Division 1 experience that you're going through. But quickly, men's volleyball, Mount Ida, here we go.
Yeah, so Mount Ida ended up obviously taking the men's job with the intramural position. The first year there, Skip Tately was the women's volleyball coach at Mount Ida. He was
Right, Skip
part-time
was there.
there.
Yeah,
He asked me to help out. Did not have a good experience with the women's program, and it had nothing to do with Skip or anything. It was like he had a couple seniors that just didn't were not interested in learning anything new about volleyball. So we just didn't connect because I was, trying to impart a little bit of wisdom as far as just sort of game strategy, and they were just like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that, and just would doing their own thing. So I was sort of
yeah.
like, yeah, like, listen, I have a lot of recruiting to do. We only had 5 players on the men's roster that year. So it was like, I have a lot of recruiting to do. So I'm just going to step back. So I ended up only, helping out with the women's program for about a month, and then sort of stepped back and focused on
Mhm.
getting the men's program up and running. So it was definitely challenging right off the bat there. I walk in, 5 guys on the roster, not a single recruit coming in. Had to do some dorm diving, had to convince the guys to bring some friends along and start playing some
Right.
open gyms and start teaching them how to pass and some little things. We ended up with 12 guys on the roster that season, um, which ended up not being terrible, but we of course went like 1-23 or whatever it was that first year. Yeah, ended up the next Skip ended up resigning at the end of that season, just retiring from volleyball altogether. Obviously he was doing it part time, and uh, as much as he loves the game and sort of and knows what he's doing, it was just sort of he was just like, yeah, like this time away from family is just too much. So he
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I'm all set. So he resigns, and then they're like, well, you did men's and women's at Riviere. You want to
There
you
you
want to take
go.
over the women's program too? And I was like, well, how much more money does that come with? And so it was a
True.
number that I was comfortable with. So I was like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll do it. um, but yeah,
Oh,
so but yeah, that next year obviously coaching the women, where I didn't really take over recruiting until after Skip had left. And at Division 3, as you're sort of a year out, right?
yep.
You're recruiting seniors their senior year,
Yep.
and for the next fall. And
Yeah.
so it was a bit of a challenge just with only half a year to try to wrangle in some people that we needed. But we had some good pieces in advance. But then that second year with the men's team, I had brought in 9 guys to help out bolster the roster. So we were pretty excited about that. Like probably 6 of the 9 were legit players from legit clubs who,
Mhm.
we're not certainly not the best players on their clubs, but we're good volleyball players. So
Right.
pretty excited. But because in all my excitement, I had decided, these guys are all talking about, oh, we're going to come in, we're going to win the GNAC, this is going to be like, they're not even going to know what hit them. And I'm just like, yeah, you guys don't know what you're getting into. Like, there are some good teams in not only the GNAC, but in all of Division 3. And these guys are just
Right.
thinking, and they're from out of region. They're just like, oh, New England volleyball, like whatever, like we're going to dominate. And so I was like, you know what? I need to make them realize how much work they actually need. Like, so I was like, so I mistakenly, after going 1-23 the previous year, uh, decided to give us the toughest schedule in all of Division 3 volleyball that next year.
I
So
know the feeling. I
we were
know
going to
the
play
feeling.
Springfield, Hunter, Baruch, UC Santa Cruz was on our roster, like it was just like one after the next of like top 15 programs in the country. So yeah, we had the toughest strength of schedule. We ended up getting 6 wins on the year, which was great, but we definitely could have gotten more had we just pared down the schedule a little bit. Um, but unfortunately, because of that, like, we had a couple guys that, they're like, oh, I'm so much better than this, and this isn't where I belong, and
Mm,
so
yeah.
I had a kid that went to Riviere for a season. He was a teammate on the club program with my middle hitter, both from California.
Mm,
And so the kid that went to Riviere didn't get a lot of playing time his freshman year. And my kid was a starter for us, like a starting middle hitter. But the right side ended up transferring to Hope International back in California, and essentially under the radar calls up my kid and is like, hey, we could use another middle. Like, and so
oh yeah,
my
it's
kid
tough.
transfers out. So
Yeah,
it
it's
was a little
tough.
rough, but even still, like I
Uh,
feel like overall, like the program, we sort of got a little bit stagnant, but over the years, I feel like the program itself improved from the time I got there, which I was quite
oh yeah.
pleased with. We sort of went
Oh
from
yeah.
a 1-23 team to at least a 500 team.
Yep.
Sort of mingling in the, oh, we might make the playoffs this year kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
and Mount Ida was a tough place to recruit to. I mean, one of the things that I know you understand is that, every school's got its sort of niche in terms of who you're recruiting and how you're getting kids on campus and stuff like that. And for Johnson and Wales, it wasn't easy to get a lot of people that were into the culinary arts. Like that was not a strong field for volleyball players, but you do the best you can. But with Johnson and Wales, there was 10,000 people that went to that school when I started. So there was sort of this feel that I could get people. And I know Mount Ida was always on that verge, and they end up closing, unfortunately, which is a shame because I like the campus quite a bit. I remember enjoying the campus. And I remember our talks when we would play because we were GNAC, we're GNAC castoffs. Like both of us, both of us don't exist in the
right.
GNAC ever anymore. But the other thing that I always like talking with you about is the experience with people, right? Like you have players that say the craziest things. You have these people you start to learn from your players that are just outrageous, and they create incredible stories. And my favorite was the strength on strength serving story. That's still my favorite story from that era. Because I think, and I don't bring it up to sort of put a mark on your program or anything, but it's a story that, quite frankly, that almost every coach goes through, where
Yeah.
you have kids that think they know better, and you're trying to provide leadership and you're trying to provide some maturity for them. Say, listen, it's not exactly how you think, and there's a reason why we do things, right? There's a reason why the system is set up the way it is. There's a reason that we're doing it this way, because other ways are not approachable, or they're not reasonable, or they don't lie in reality. So,
Right.
so I mean, if you could, if it's okay, tell that story. You don't need to use names, but it was incredibly funny.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't remember the specifics of the story. I remember who I was having the conversation with, but I don't necessarily remember the specifics of the context of where we were. But I just so I had this one outside hitter he was an undersized outside hitter, probably like 5'9", 5'10", jumped pretty well, but he always dreamed of being the 6'4"
Right,
go-to, I guess.
right, right.
But yeah, I think what happened was, we sort of set up the game plan as far as, all right, this is who we want to attack when we're serving, trying to get them out of system and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, he was just like, oh, like, why don't we serve that guy? And I'm like, well, that guy's the best passer on the team, like,
We're
and their
not gonna
best
serve
hitter.
him.
Like, why would we serve him and give him an opportunity to get a perfect pass to then go crush a ball? Like, we'll serve somebody who can't do that. Like, he's like, well, like I'm the best server and strength on strength. And I'm like, what?
What
Like,
does that mean?
but yeah, I mean, it's like, just because you're our best server doesn't mean that you're the best server in the country or the best server in the gym. Like,
Strength on strength.
yeah, like
I loved it.
your 35 mile an hour topspin serve is not really gonna phase that guy.
Oh my gosh. And we all, and quite frankly, that's my favorite story. But we all have, as coaches, we've all heard in reality portions of a similar type of story like that, where a kid's like, no, this is why we should do it. And you're like, no, no, that's not why we shouldn't do that
Right,
at all. Like this is there's reason. And it comes back to that idea that I just hammered home. So I'm gonna do it one more time. Almost all coaches, there's a reason for what they're doing. There's the system is
right,
there for a reason. It's not because, because we just put it there nonchalantly or willy-nilly. We actually thought this through. We're actually really trying to accomplish something, and we're
right.
taking the pieces of the puzzle that we have and trying to use those pieces as effectively as possible to try to get the best result possible.
Like, my goal is always to do my best to make the other team uncomfortable. Like, that's my
Right.
goal. Like, whatever that means. Like, it could be a different blocking strategy, it could be a serving strategy, whatever. And usually a combination of everything, right? Like,
Right. Of course.
so for somebody to be like, yeah, I'm just gonna ignore you and just serve their best player and allow them
Strength
to
on
just hit
strength.
balls down our throats. Like,
Dude, Craig,
no,
I've
that's not
used
really a
that.
good idea.
I coach club now, and I've used it at least once a year, every year. Like every
Nice.
year, I've brought that story up. Oh, that's wonderful. All right, so just to finish up your career, you do you move on to Stonehill and do Division 2 work and Division 1 work, and quickly talk about that. You had a lot of success, especially recently in the Division 2 world, and now the challenges of Division 1. And then I want to talk a little bit about your brand of volleyball, and then my questions that I ask almost every coach because I think it's fascinating to hear the answer. So
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I had no desire or interest. I thought I'd be a Division 3 coach for the rest of my life. I love the Division 3 model and aspect, and sort of the family life that people are typically able to achieve if they want it. I know obviously as coaches we tend to put a ton of emphasis on our coaching profession and
true.
want to put a ton of energy into that aspect. But I think the Division 3, you do have that opportunity to sit back and sort of enjoy the other things in life, which is really nice. But essentially, like you said, Mount Ida closed down. I was out of a job. I ended up at UMass Lowell for a season with their women's program. So that was my first taste of Division 1, which was, a blessing in the sense of obviously where we're at now. But certainly Lowell had just finished their transition. I think they were in year 6 the year that I was there after their transition. So they were fully able to make it to the NCAA tournament. Certainly not fully funded at the time. And then it was a shock that they decided to cut their volleyball program. So, I was only there for one season. They cut the volleyball program in December after our season was over. And sort of people moved on. Like we had some players that stayed just to finish out their scholarships, and then others that, certainly the younger players that transferred to continue playing elsewhere. But yeah, then 6 months of sitting around the house with my 6-month-old son at the time made me realize quickly I am not a stay-at-home dad.
It's
Sort of going
hard.
a little crazy. It is very hard. So it's going a little
Hard.
crazy there. Um, threw out a few resumes and didn't get interviews anywhere, which was surprising to me.
I know the
Um,
feeling.
but then yeah, so I actually I actually applied to Holy Cross, knowing that I was not necessarily going to be what they were looking for a new head coach, knowing that obviously I had Division 3 experience, but no Division 1 head coaching experience. But the person that got the Holy Cross was the Stonehill coach, and so the Stonehill job opened up. So I obviously applied here. No idea how many other candidates they had, but sort of brought me in for a couple interviews. And obviously ended up offering me the job. So yeah, it was great. But yeah, coming into Division 2, the former coach Kathleen, she had a really nice sophomore class that was here, and then a really, really, a talented freshman class that came in. Um, so it was nice to sort of ride on the coattails a little bit. Essentially the sophomore class that year was sort of the class, just as far as
Yeah.
they were the studs. So that year, I think the team had gone like 11-11 the year before, 500, had just barely missed the playoffs. So we ended up 17-10 or something that next year.
Mhm.
Move some pieces around that I think the girls were a little bit skeptical of at first as far as positions, just sort of being like, okay, yeah, I know you were playing left side last year, but right now we need you on the right, and we need, sort of moving people around a little bit. But ultimately, they were all game for any changes. They obviously felt like the previous structure was not working, so they were like, okay, whatever you want to do, like let's do it. So
Yeah.
they're on board, which was obviously a huge key. As a new coach coming in, feeling like
Oh yeah.
like they're willing to make changes, and so that was good. But we ended up fourth in the conference, got to host a playoff game, made it to the semifinals that year, lost in the semifinals. Unfortunately, I think we were eighth in the region, which would have
Hmm.
gotten us an at-large bid into the NCAA tournament. But there was an upset in one of the other conferences of somebody that was not ranked regionally that upset somebody who was ranked ahead of us.
Yeah.
So we
Yep.
ended up missing out on the NCAA tournament that year, and I think the girls sort of took that a little bit personally. But certainly that next year, or sorry, the next year was the COVID year, so we ended up being shut down that whole next year and sort of a full year of
Yeah.
development, which was good. But then by the time we got back, that sophomore class was now seniors. 5 of them were starters. Our junior class, we had a starting right side who ended up she left us a little bit early to go to Villanova to start law
Hmm.
school.
Hmm.
So it's hard to blame her for that, but at the same time, it was like, we could really use you. But
We
it's
like you
Division 1
playing.
transition. Yeah, it's Division 1 transition would have been much easier had you been here.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so that 2021 season, I just had a group of seniors that they just wanted it, and so they were
Mm,
just driven, and I think ultimately, like, the COVID recruiting class, didn't have the experience that we needed on the back end. So we didn't really have much options as far as, somebody was struggling. We didn't really have too many people to come off of the bench and really help
right.
out. But I think the seniors liked it that way.
Well, yeah,
But
and that's sort of the story of all those kids in that COVID era. Like they were all
yeah,
sort of, just didn't get what they needed, and now, they're at the college level and they're playing catch up, which is,
right.
unfortunate, but is what
Yeah.
it is.
But yeah, so essentially we had a pretty good run in the regular season. We sort of faltered a little bit at the end. I think we ended up in third place in the conference. Had a real gritty win in the quarterfinals here, and then unfortunately dropped a tough match to University or New Haven in the semifinals. So we got sort of bounced from the conference championship a little earlier than we were hoping for. But essentially, it was the 1 and 2 team that made it to the final. So it's not like it was
Right. Yeah.
an upset of any kind.
Sure.
But we were still ranked high enough in the regional rankings that we got the at-large bid into the NCAA tournament, which was nice. We ended up getting a first-round win there, which is the first in school
Super
history
cool.
of
Yeah.
getting through that round. We ended up losing to the team that ended up going to the Elite Eight that year in
Hmm.
game in college. So, overall, there's a little bit of solace that the fact that it wasn't just us that they beat everybody else that they
You
played
beat
that in the
everyone.
region that season.
Yeah.
But certainly, anytime you lose, it leaves a sour taste in your mouth, and
Sure.
certainly people are upset about it. But yeah, but then, I think it was what, like February after that season, they sort of told us like, hey, we got this invitation uh pending that we're considering as far as making the move to Division 1. Like, don't tell anybody, but it's pending.
It's happening.
Sure. Yeah, and like it was weird because I think Don Ferguson.
Hmm.
So he had actually texted me. He's like, "Hey, I heard you moving to Division 1," and I'm like, "I haven't heard that. Like, where are you hearing that?" And he's like, "Oh, like he started telling me the story, and then like it was probably a week later where we go to a staff meeting, and they sort of announced to us that yes, in fact, we did get an invitation. It's pending. We're going through the process of deciding if we want to accept
Don.
it or not." And
Don has the Don has the finger on the pulse of
right,
everything.
but yeah, I like text Don. I'm like, "How did you know like this? Like, I just found out today. Like, how did you already know?" But yeah, so it's sort of like one of those, you're trying to recruit, you're not quite sure where you're recruiting to.
Mm,
But it was definitely a little bit stressful in that situation, just as far as, okay, here's the people we thought are going to make us stronger Division 2 players, or team. But now what happens if we make that Division 1 jump? Like, where are we going to go with it? Um, so yeah, it was, we ended up, you know, obviously once we made the move, we actually already had our recruiting class set, but it was sort of one of those things where it was like, all right, we at least feel like this person's not going to hurt us moving forward and probably
mm.
has the potential to develop into something really good. But obviously, you don't have no idea if they want the Division 1 lifestyle. So,
Good
it was one of
point.
those.
Yeah.
We had to have that Zoom chat with everybody, make the official announcement to not only our team, but obviously the 4 recruits we had coming in. And of course, they're all excited. Everybody sort of dreams of that Division 1, but you don't necessarily always
Right. But
choose that Division 1 or have the
right.
ability to play that Division 1.
But you don't know what you're actually getting into,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you think, I think that's one of the things. I remember when we had our pre-match meeting when I was broadcasting at Brown and you were playing Brown. The talk was like D2 athletes and D1 athletes are similar in skill set. The problem is the size and the speed and the physicality. Like it's just more at the Division 1 level.
Right.
And because of that, like, yeah, I mean, you were recruiting for Division 2, and now it's like, hey, you guys are all Division 1 guys, girls now, and women now, and you got to you got to figure that out. Is that exactly? I think you described it perfectly. Is that exactly what you wanted? Because that may not
Right.
be what you think it is.
Yeah, yeah,
You
and I
know?
mean, yeah, again, we had one of our outside hitters that was coming in had been recruited by a couple of Division 1 schools, so it's not like, but she chose the Division 2 school, so it's like, did you choose it because of the division or simply because of the school? Which obviously was
Right,
just more the school than anything else, more the school in the program. But it was, you know, again, like we're all trying to figure it out together. Like as far as just the full transition process and everything that goes into it, and obviously one of the hardest things is, at Division 2, you're what do they call it? Like your scholarship structures. It's not a head count sport. It's an equivalency sport. So they give us a certain amount of money. You can divide it up however you want, and then go from there. And then as soon as we make the announcement that we're Division One, like, oh boy, the emails, the phone calls, like, hey, you're Division One now. Can I have a full scholarship? Hey, you're Division One now. And not necessarily from our players, but certainly got a few. Hey, now that you're Division One, can my daughter get more money than she was getting as Division Two from a few of our parents? And it's, hey, like, number one, we're certainly not
No.
fully funded. Number two, they're not increasing our scholarship structure immediately for next year.
Right.
I said,
Right.
and it's like, listen, like, you just have to assume that the only difference right now is who we're playing. Like, there's no other changes to anything right now. But, all of a sudden I'm getting calls from club coaches around the country, like, hey, you got this kid that would be great for you, and she's looking for a full ride. Yeah, well, I don't have that. Like, here we are in year two. I still don't have that, but I'm getting those calls. As soon as the announcement went out in March, I think it was, like, the very next day, I had like 7 emails from club
Dude,
coaches around the country.
that's one of the reasons NCSA exists, right?
Yeah.
Like I was part of NCSA, and one of the things that happens is that there's a misconception about what all that stuff means, and so NCSA hires people that have expertise in that have experience with it, and then it's a valuable resource to be able to contact a college coach and say, yeah, they are D1, but they may not have what you think is going on, right? Like you can't just be like, yeah, it's D1. They have scholarships. All of them. All
Mhm.
of them are on scholarships.
Right. Look at all
Everyone's
these
got a
people going
full
to school
ride.
for free. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Everyone's got going to school for free, and it's just it's yeah, it's fascinating. It's one of those things that I wanted to talk to you about off camera, and I did when I saw you at Brown. Like, what's the difference? Because as Division three, I'm a Division three guy for men's volleyball. Like that's what my experience is. That's what I know. There is no scholarship money. Like we don't do that. So to me, the next frontier of understanding is the scholarship world. And I sort of pinned you when I saw you. It's like, dude, tell me about the money. Like, how's that all
Yeah.
work? And of course we don't need to go to it here, but it's definitely something that I want to learn more about. And I know, um, you know, on the men's side, it's easier because there isn't money really in men's volleyball. Like that when I was working for NCSA, that was really easy. It was kind of like, I know a story about one of the best volleyball players in the world that's playing for, he's the outside one for the national team, played at Penn State. And I know for a fact he got 0 scholarship dollars. So
Right.
if he can't get it, nobody can get it. Easy conversation.
Well, like, one of my favorite memories was actually, so Craig Kolick had won the Division III National Coach of the Year through the AVCA after that 2006 season. And so he took me with him. Me and Don Ferguson went with him to the AVCA convention, so he had his award. And John Spira had won the Division I Coach of the Year, and he was at UC Irvine at the time. But Kolick comes up and he's a very eloquent speaker. Like, has his full speech written out. Like, has some sort of message in his speech, not just thanking people, but does a good job. And then Spira comes up and nothing in front of him. He's like, oh yeah, thanks for this award, appreciate it. And he's like, a lot of it just comes down to the players just trusting that they're going to get better here. And he's like, but it helps when you got the National Player of the Year, and he was like, yeah, we got him for books. Like, essentially they gave him like $500 for books. And he's like, yeah, and that guy just came as a walk on because his friend came the year before, and he's sort of like nonchalantly like going through his roster about how they essentially, most of them came for free just because they had a friend there. And it's just like, oh, is that all you got to do is have really good volleyball player friends, and then their friends will come, and then all of a sudden you have a national
The
championship level
recruiting
team.
aspect of it.
Yeah, like, that sounds awesome. For the message, John.
that, that reminds me of when Nancy Samara won the AVCA National Coach of the Year, and so she goes to the same same convention that you're describing, and goes through the whole routine, and then she comes back and how was it? It must have been really cool. She's like, yeah, it was really nice, really great. And I got a couple pictures and this and that, and she posts one of the pictures, and we're like, Nancy, that's awesome. You got to meet Karch Karai, because Karch gave her the award, and
Yep.
Karch has his arm around her, and there's a picture, and she's like, yeah, I didn't know who that was. Well, really? And like immediately I'm just like, are you putting me on? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
She's like, no, I didn't know who he was. Like, I was like, hey, thanks for the award. those things are great. And yeah, I mean, the recruitment aspect of college athletics is the ball game. I mean, you can have as much knowledge as possible. You can be the king of X's and O's, and if you don't have the horses, it's just not going to matter. And certainly to hear your story about Sprout talking about, hey, this guy knows a guy that just rolls in because they all want to hang out and be in the same dorm room. That's
Yep.
just unbelievable. When you think about all the effort and hard work that goes into recruiting on the college coaches end, like just
Yeah.
all the tournaments you go to, all the data you sift through, all the information you send out, all the phone calls you make. And then Sprawl's
For
like,
me,
yeah,
I feel like especially when you're hearing it from a Division 1, person who's been in the Division 1 world only, right? Or
yeah,
somewhere on that level. Like I remember going to a gold medal squared coaches clinic years ago, and the Arizona State the women's coach was there, and he was like, "Oh, like you got to make sure that your best passer is your libero, like hands down." And then somebody's like, "Well, what if your best passer is also your best outside hitter?" He's like, "Well, then you need to find a new best passer." Like it's like, what? If that's not your best passer, then go find yourself a new best passer. I'm like, I mean, you're talking to some, like obviously I was a Division 3 coach at the time, and I'm just like,
yeah,
it's I understand it for even for me at Division 3, it's like, okay, yes, I can in fact really put my head down and try to find a better passer for that situation. But some of these high school coaches you're talking to, it's like they don't really have that option. It's who showed up to my gym and who's the best passer available to me right now, And
that's
if
right.
they're not
That's
getting a
right.
job done, it's not like you're gonna go, oh, next year I'm getting somebody new. Like you don't know if you got somebody new. So just the way that they were talking, I was just sort of like, I don't know if you're really talking to the right crowd here.
Yes, a lot of the Division 1 big time guys, like it's definitely it's a different world and a gigantic different world, and the ability to like I don't know Sparrow well anyway. I mean, of course, we're not personally acquainted at all, but you can't tell me that you being at UCLA and being the head coach for the national team, it's not hard for somebody for you to go, all right, I need a libero, and then there's like 30 of them that would die to be in your
Right.
program, and you just get to pick the best one and roll. And most of them, I would argue, would probably do it and pay full price for UCLA just to be a part of that
Right.
situation.
Yep.
Whereas if you're a D3, like, Johnson and Wales, I need a new libero. I'm out begging 10 guys, please just come to my school, visit. Like,
I
we'll show
swear you're
you.
gonna have a great time.
Yeah, please just take a look,
Right.
and certainly the more you build your prestige, like I'm sure that Kolek had a better opportunity to grab good players because he had won championship after championship, and
Yep.
there's this culture of success, and hey,
Been
I've won
networking
400.
for 30
Yeah,
years already.
exactly. So he had a little bit better opportunity to grab those guys, but even he's still working,
Yep.
unlike, Spara. I mean, I'm not saying Spara doesn't put work in. I'm sure he busts his tail too. Like I'm sure he's doing hard stuff, but you know, there is sort of this feeling that like, hey, let's be reasonable. Certain well, the better way to say it is that there is no cookie cutter solution. Like it's
Yeah.
more like, hey, the real trick is it takes hard work. It takes a lot
Yeah.
of time and effort.
And certainly having a name out there, like to an extent, even Riviere with Kolek, he'd obviously built the reputation of the program and just sort of had the admiration of all these other club coaches and coaches from around the country. I mean, when we got Aaron Almario to come in, like it was on a whim because Kolek had tried recruiting a player from this guy's high school like 5 years ahead of time. Like he's like, yeah, 5 years ago I was recruiting this kid, and every once in a while I just send him an email and just say, hey, like, how's your team looking? And he's like, and now all of a sudden I got this 6'9" behemoth of an
Oh,
individual who has an offer to play basketball at Cal State Northridge, but doesn't think he wants to play basketball anymore, but wants to focus on volleyball. And it's so late in the recruiting game that he's like, hey, I got this guy out in New Hampshire who might be interested. And sure enough, like the coach flies him out, and shows him
dude.
around, and he shows up, and it's like it was like zero done but all because Kolek had gotten the network done ahead of time. And I'm
And that
probably oversimplifying that, but
sure.
that's sort of what it felt like. And I was a part of that, like I was there. So it was like,
Yeah.
I'm just sort of like, where did this guy come from? And he's like, yeah, I just sort of talked to this guy a couple years back with a different player, and now here's this guy. It's like an
And
all
that
American.
dude and that dude was an absolute complete shadow.
Right.
Like you would go to try to hit a ball, and that dude would be so far on your side, like he would block out the sun.
Yeah.
I
But for me
remember,
at Mount Ida, for
oh,
me at Mount Ida, it was just like I'm still trying to like tell people like they're like, oh, I've never heard of you. Like, yeah, well, yeah, I know. Like, like, let me tell you a little about us, Like, but
oh
yeah,
my
when UCLA
gosh.
calls, they're like, oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I remember Scotty Wright. Scotty Wright ended up, taking on the Regis job for a little bit. And he's like, and I remember him talking about how his recruiting process, nobody knows who we are. So my goal is to go to every eatery and just dump all my literature on the table and leave
I
because
went
they
out
got to go
recruiting with
eat.
him. Yeah, I went out recruiting with him to California one time, and he said the same thing. It was like I was like just he's like I always bring like literature, and I was like, you know what, I never do that when I go out recruiting. Like maybe I'll give it a whirl. And so admissions put together this whole suitcase for me to bring with me, and I end up at this tournament, this boys tournament, and so again I start like sort of leaving pamphlets around, and then next thing I know, there's somebody from the facility is like throwing them all away, and I'm like, oh, like what's? They're like, you're not allowed to leave this stuff. I'm like, I mean, this is a boys volleyball tournament and I'm a college coach, like looking to leave some information. They're like, well, you can't just leave it on the tables. And I'm just like, okay, like where can I leave it? And they're like, well, not here. Like this is ridiculous. Why are you leaving this stuff here? I'm like, well, these are high school kids looking to get recruited to play volleyball in college, and I'm a college coach. Like I'm confused as to why you think this is inappropriate. And so I don't know, it's just this whole thing. And eventually, like I wasn't allowed to leave it around. Like I wasn't allowed to put it anywhere to have on a table. And so I don't want to bring it home with me, right? So I just like throw it away before we
Well,
get to the airport.
well, I see that your crime there is that you cared what they were doing. Like Scotty would just dump it on the table and
Well, but
leave.
that's what I was doing. I was leaving, I was putting it, but they were throwing it away, and
Yeah.
well, why are you
Yeah.
throwing my stuff away?
Let me throw it away.
Yeah, like yeah, I threw it away at the airport, so I didn't have to like pay for the charge to put it back on the
To bring
plane.
it home.
It was like 95 pounds of reading material.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. Awesome. Well, dude, it's been really fun talking with you. I do have a couple more questions for
Yeah.
you, then I'll let you go. These are sort of the standard questions I've been asking everybody, and I love to hear the answers on it. I think the first one is, what is one thing that you think every coach should know that he or she probably does not?
Oh God, I don't know. That's such a I don't know if I can say that there's one thing, I think obviously every situation is going to be different. And I think anytime, specifically, I guess if you're getting into the college coaching world, um, yeah, and most college coaches know it has way more to do with recruiting than it does with anything else. So,
Yeah.
like obviously you have to have some sort of personal skills and communication skills to communicate with your own players, but using those skills to recruit and sell your program. And I know for me, I always struggled when I first started at Mount Ida. I struggled with the recruiting aspect because I did not believe that the academics at the school was someplace I would wanted to recruit to, And so
Mm,
it was like the first couple of years we had a really low academic profile. And I didn't really feel comfortable trying to convince kids that they were going to get a quality education there. Now, through the years, they ended up really improving their academic profile and improving their programs and bringing in higher quality students with higher GPAs, which then elevated the level of the overall
mm,
GPA of the school, which then obviously brings in more businesses to try to recruit your students to jobs in the
yeah.
future. So certainly as the school continued and we sort of made that shift, from a volleyball standpoint, it actually made it easier to recruit, just because in my opinion, volleyball players have to be pretty smart for the most part. Like not that you can't find that real athletic kid that can't pass a basic English class, but for the most part, most of the kids that I talk to are all looking for higher GPA institutions. So it made it a little bit easier to recruit, specifically on the women's side there, but even on the men's side, just convincing parents that yes, you are going to get a quality education here. So I guess for me, I would always say, like if you're going to be coaching, make sure it's at a place that you believe in. Obviously, at the high school level, it's a little easier, I think, as far as you don't really have that many choices. But certainly, if you're deciding to get into the college ranks, like my assistant can tell you, like he played at Regis. He ended up going to he was a head coach at Dean College for a few years, and then he ended up as a volunteer assistant at URI and then Merrimack. Um, and he'll tell you the same thing. Like some of the places, like when he was at Dean and when he was, looking at even at the other two schools, he wasn't really a part of recruiting at the other two schools as a volunteer, but it was just sort of like, I don't know if I feel comfortable like trying to convince somebody that this is the place for them, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say anything negative about those schools. It's just obviously as a coach, you sort of have, here's what my level of competence is in what I'm trying to sell. Because essentially you are a salesperson, right? Like
Right.
I hate being a salesperson. I don't want to be a salesperson, but essentially that's what you are. You're trying to, and I think that's what I love here about Stonehill is like I am 100% like confident in the ability that our student athletes and our students are going to have great opportunities after they leave here to get
Mm.
jobs. So yeah, I would just say no matter what, just really, really buy into the place that you're coaching at and really make sure that it's someplace that you believe in.
That's a great point. I've done a lot of these interviews and I've never heard that angle. And angle is probably the wrong word. It's more philosophy, but it's massively important because I've shared those feelings. Like when I was at JWU, there was a couple times, a couple years where it's like I started thinking about the cost of education and the idea of, hey, I'm basically convincing an 18-year-old kid to take on debt, and am I comfortable with that? And certainly believing in your university, believing in your college, and believing in what the programs are, that they're valuable and that there will be opportunities after, that's massively important. So great point, Craig. The other thing too, I flip the question and I say, what do you think? Yeah, if I could talk, what do you think student athletes should know that they probably don't?
That's tough because I feel like it's stuff that they should know, but is just never brought to them. Or I guess every year you have to remember that you're dealing with people that are inexperienced, right? So no matter who you're talking to, you have to remember, okay, like yes, I've done this a gazillion times, but this is their first time doing it.
Mm.
But ultimately, I think it's that piece, and it's the same piece. It's the value of what you're going to get, and I think so many people obviously value, oh, put a ball in your kids' hands when they're young so that they can get an athletic scholarship. Obviously 1% of people in all of the country get athletic scholarships coming out of high school, right? So it's not like a lucrative thing, so ultimately picking the school that is fits your values as far as obviously a financial value, but also the social values, and obviously your educational values, and really finding the place that's the right fit for them individually without that outside pressure of, oh, I have to play Division 1, I have to play Division 2, or I have to play Division 3 or whatever it is, and just find the right institution for you. With that being said, I don't know. I think everybody, it's a tough thing because you're always talking finances, and I think one thing, I was a first generation college student, and I had no idea how the financial aspect of going to college worked. Now that obviously being in it, I do know, but I would say don't ever think anything's out of your reach as far as from a financial perspective. Because I think, like you said, like a lot of people see that Division 3 price tag. Oh my goodness, like how am I ever going to pay for that? But
Right.
obviously, go through the process. Like go through the financial aid office at the college and figure out where other sources of funding can come from, because there are tons and tons of private scholarships and grants, and obviously the federal grants and federal loans and things like that to help pay for it. But ultimately, the real question is, will I make enough money after college to pay for the investment that I've made in myself? And I
Right.
think that's one thing I would also say is college is an investment in your future, right? So it's not for everybody, but at the same time, if what you are doing, like if you decide to, I don't know, be a school teacher, right? Like we all know school teachers are definitely underpaid at every level.
Mm.
Like, is it worth it to go to a very private institution to be a elementary school teacher down the road and be $100,000 in debt as opposed to going to a state school, or someplace, or even a junior college and getting a very similar degree and taking the same path and having less debt? So, obviously everybody's got to answer that for themselves individually. Everybody comes from a different economic background and what they have the ability to pay up front. But I think just the financial aspect, there's just so many avenues to go. And I think a lot of people just see that price tag up front and knock schools off their list without actually looking into it. So I think just sort
Yeah.
of taking that avenue and just finding the right school that's going to be the right fit for each person.
And I think you bring up another good point. Fight for every dollar you can, right? At the end of the day, there are other opportunities that help with paying, and like private scholarships. Sometimes your town has scholarships. There's stuff that you can go for that almost doesn't get touched. Like,
Yeah.
year after year, there's private scholarships that are out there that don't get even applied for. And then next thing that money's just sitting there. And if you're the one person that applies for it, boom,
Yeah.
now you got some help. Now maybe your books are covered, and then maybe there's something else. So yeah, fight for every dollar, but awesome stuff. Yeah, good stuff. All right, man. Like, those are the two questions I usually ask
Cool.
everybody. Any final thoughts before I let you go? And I know I've wasted a lot of your time, but I do appreciate you coming on.
No,
It's been
man, I
wonderful
love
talking
chatting
with
with you,
you.
Scott. So I appreciate you having me on. I know I sort of made a joke when I saw you at Brown of when am I ever going to get the invite? So I hope this wasn't a pity invite.
No, 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 no.
But
There's a lot of people left on the list that are like, wait,
nice.
Craig Martin?
Yeah. But no, I love chatting with you, man. Like it's always fun time. So I appreciate you having me. And hopefully, yeah, we can do it again sometime.
Anytime. I'd love to have you back. So awesome. Great stuff. If you like this video, guys, like and subscribe. And I hate that I have to say that because it sounds so damn corny, but that's the world we live in. If you're a YouTube guy, and I'm not a YouTube guy, Craig. I'm a college coach. I'm a volleyball media hack. And I'm just trying to interview really interesting and good college coaches and learn what your life is about, what your volleyball stuff is about, but also provide that information for people that are interested. Because I think at the end of the day, one of the things, and maybe this could be your final thought. One of the things that I've discovered as I've gone through this whole process of not being a college coach is that there's a lot of people that do not know how volleyball works, how the game works, how any of it works. And I'd love to be a resource that helps enlighten people on how it all goes down.
Yeah, and I know when you saw you at Brown and you sort of mentioned that, when you call games, you obviously use the correct terminology and you sort of relate it to volleyball and not to a different sport, which I think is hugely important just because people won't learn if obviously there are times when you want to be able to relate, one thing to the next to try to grasp it. But, if you're constantly using a basketball term or a baseball term to
Right.
describe happening on a volleyball court, it makes it really hard to really understand what's going on. And, again, for me, volleyball is such a high IQ game. Just sort of being able to recognize all the different moving parts and everything that goes into it is definitely something worth sharing. And I'm glad that you're doing your part to help share that.
Well, I got to make sure I stop calling you the Sky Chiefs, or no one's going to believe me. So,
I got
all
you.
right, all right, Craig, stay
Skyhawks. Here
well.
we go. All right. Thanks. You too. Bye bye.
Take care, man.